Well, we made it to Friday. It's Friday, January 6, 2023, your Day with the podcast, brought to you by Cowboy State Daily. Check them out at cowboystatedaily.com or on their Facebook page. So brought to you by WYDOT. Remember, when there's ice and snow, take it slow. Well, this podcast is going to sound and look just like the other ones you've seen this week because really the pattern isn't going to change. The Pacific will continue to churn out storms one after another. They're going to move into the west coast and across the eastern Pacific, but the storms will fall apart as they cross the divide. So basically, mountains and west of the divide have the best chances for snow, but once you get east of the divide, what will occasionally happen is you'll get snow showers at times spilling over the mountains onto the plains, but at least here through the weekend and probably through early next week, these systems are just going to get chewed up between the mountains and the west coast by the time they get to the front range. And the plains, there's not much less. The best analogy is what happens with hurricanes. Hurricanes maintain their integrity and their organization when they're over the water. But when they hit the land, they get ripped apart. They slowly dissipate because of the friction force of interacting with the land, and all the mountainous terrain in the west makes things happen even quicker. So you just aren't able to maintain their integrity. Now, eventually, what will happen is they'll start to get pushed further inland. The pattern changes enough that by mid-month and beyond, second half of the month, we'll start to see the storms get a little bit farther and have a chance to be a little bit more put together once they cross the divide. Kind of like what we saw over New Year's weekend when we had one be able to maintain itself over the divide. But at least probably for the next week, it's going to be all about the west coast. Here's another satellite photo this morning across the Pacific. That big comma-shaped cloud that we saw a couple of days ago, that's what's left over Idaho and parts of Utah this morning. This is what's going to come through later today and tonight across the Rockies. But that's all that's left from that big storm. But, well, you can see it right here. Look at these lows just continuing to march along. So we've got one here, we've got one here, we got one back here. They just continue to march along. It's just a wave train of storms across the Pacific. So it's basically going to be more of the same. This is what's left of that upper level low that we just showed you on the satellite imagery. So as it comes on in, it comes in a weakened state, but it's moist. So this is through Saturday afternoon. There's going to be some moisture pushing out across the central Rockies right here. So there's going to be a little bit of precipitation into the Great Basin and into the mountains, a little bit of snow. Notice later today and tonight, there's going to be a little bit of snow along Interstate 80 here. So you'll need to watch that, travelers. The mountains of Colorado, the mountains of Utah, western Wyoming, Idaho, up here into Montana, a little bit of snow as well up into the high country. But east of the divide, other than a little bit of snow shower activity right here, there's really not going to be much through the weekend. And this will also lead to seasonal or moderate temperatures. There's your snowfall forecast through Saturday. However, as we showed you yesterday, when we put together the 10-day loop of the 500 millibar chart, you can see that you see these waves continuing to move into the west coast. Then they just can't really hold together very long until they end. On the last frame here, you'll see a larger trough getting pushed further inland. And that's going to be right around the 15th, 16th, 17th of the month. A little bit around that time or thereafter, the timing will change and this pattern will change. But the overall writing message here is you can just continue to see the waves continue to hit the west coast and then they weaken as they head east. So you'll see over the next 10 days, there's just more coming. The rainfall and the snowfall across the west coast, really amazing. And then as you see, as the moisture moves inland, there's that gradient of heavier in the west, lighter as the precipitation goes off to the east. And that's what the snowfall totals look like. Look at those snow totals, again, over the next 10 days in the Sierra Nevada. But also impressive into the central and northern Rockies as well in the Pacific Northwest mountain ranges. If you were to look at the variability of western precipitation, and this is the thing that folks need to be reminded of, is that it does seem like it's feast or famine in the western United States when it comes to precipitation, especially for California and the far west, but to some extent the Rockies. because you have these fluctuations that we talk about all the time in the Pacific, these warmer and colder cycles. And if you look at reservoir storage back to 1970, this really plays out. So if you look at that blue horizontal line there, which is basically the average of acre feet over that period since 1970, these white bars basically show the high variability of reservoir storage. Look at what happened in the 70s there. Basically, it's just a wave, it's just a sine wave pattern back and forth with some big dips and some big valleys. So what's been experiencing over the last, 10, 30 years across the far west is a feast and famine situation. You have these wet cycles, you have these dry cycles, and you can really see that when you look at the reservoir storage, at least in the California reservoirs. So here we are right here after a big trough. We're going right back up. But that's exactly what happens when we look at other droughts in California. You get out of them, and you tend to get out of them rather severely with these big spikes. After a drought, you get these heavy waves of precipitation. So actually, if you look historically, what's happening right now is really not unusual at all. Taking a look at the Japanese model from the Japanese meteorological folks, going out to weeks 3 and 4. So basically what I'm showing you here, here's the United States, and the long-range model from the Japan agency is showing that this blue area is basically an area of low pressure during the second 2 weeks of January. And notice that it's not hung up on the west coast like it is now, but it comes further inland. So basically you have a more stormy pattern, a more active pattern during the second half of the month coming off the coast and into the Rockies and Plains states. So we should see an uptick in the weather getting across the mountains by then. But up until then, we're going to see all the activity along and west of the divide. 360 hours out. This is looking around January 20th. This is when we probably start to see the pipeline of the Pacific kind of get interrupted a little bit, and we start to see the high pressure build in the eastern Pacific, which starts to bring more of a northwest flow into the Rockies and the northern Plains states. So really, it's going to be up until then where we're going to see this west coast pattern dominating, with the storms still getting hung up along the west coast. Have yourself a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday.